So what I have here is a quotation. I love to use whenever I can because it's something I found in some letters between W.E.B. Du Bois and George Padmore. And so my name is Thomas Crompton. I study a PhD in social policy in trade unions. And for me, the idea of decolonisation has always been there, quite relevant, that I took a lot of inspiration from George Padmore, who is a Pan-Africanist thinker. And a lot of kind of the issues that come up in his letters between himself and Du Bois when they're trying to organise the 5th Pan-African Congress, I think are relevant to issues we have today. He even begins earlier on talking about how there's an issue in organising students because it's a floating population, you know, of students coming and going a lot. And his idea is, you know, he's very much thinking about decolonisation from below. And that's something that we've been trying to think about, and this is something that I think a lot of people in their collectives have been trying to have a go with, where you're not doing policies from a top-down perspective, but you're doing, you know, like, I mean, a lot of people have been talking about today, co-creation, collaboration, making it more grassroots, having, you know, deep roots in the masses, he says. So for me, that's what I've been looking to get out of doing this, and we have, as part of the project, been meeting in SPS, as School for Business and Society. We've been speaking to students, we've been to a conference, and we've noticed some trends that we'd like to talk about today. We've seen kind of success stories, but we've also seen a lot of failures that we're kind of, you know, that's been one of the more striking things, I guess, that's come up to us. That a lot of decolonisation collectives started off, as we mentioned in the abstract, around the kind of the, if you like, resurgence of BLM in 2020, because obviously BLM is a term that's existed for a long time. And many of them have, you know, after that, students and staff have collaborated, but a lot of them have shut down after a while. A lot of them haven't managed to survive. And so something we'd like to think about today is kind of the practicalities, not necessarily the kind of the theory, and this will be our only kind of, I guess, theoretical side of things. But how do you make a decolonisation collective actually work? What does that look like? What do people want out of it? And again, maybe we can start scratching out that issue of why do so many that started up in, say, 2020 no longer even have active websites?
Yeah, so kind of following to what Thomas says, the next couple slides could be a set of questions that we hope to kind of go through it together and have an open discussion about really what you think decolonization is, what projects such as decolonization should be doing, and why do you think they fail, and then we'll go through them slowly. So we'll kind of start with this question, and what I want you to do is just, you know, just let us know what your name is and why you're here today, why you became interested, and then let us know what you think decolonization should be doing. And the reason that we all kind of sat in a circle is because we're not here to teach you anything. One of the biggest things with education and academic and that I've been is, you know, you go into a classroom, you get lectured on, you feed your water bottle, your big knowledge of things, and then you kind of dump it on the next test or the next essay, and then there's things to do. And really what we're wanting to do is create a bit of a reflective session. You guys can bring this back into your classroom. You can have a more open discussion with staff about what you're looking for today. And so really with that, we're going to open up the room. You know, whoever wants to start in the circle or the wider circle as well, let us know your name and what you think a decolonization project should be doing. Whoever wants to start, if not, I will start pointing fingers.
I'll start. My name is Liz. I am both a PhD researcher here at the University in the Archaeology Department, but I'm also a digital creativity advisor at the library. I'm here in dual role. And in terms of what decolonization projects should be doing, it should be changing the way that we teach, learn, and exist within an academic framework. It's not, I mean, for me, I'm hypercritical of a lot of decolonization projects that I've come across within particularly British Academy. Or the British academia, because I've kind of lost interest in a lot of them because I feel that they're not doing enough, but then of course that's me coming from a different perspective. So I think it's yeah, that's all it's supposed to say.
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Anja. I'm a lecturer in biology, and I'm really interested in how in a subject like biology I could do something. decolonisation is basically what that would mean for my personal teaching. So yeah, and I'm basically here to learn a bit more.
It's like we're going in a circle. That's right. That's cool. Maybe you set that. Yeah, so I work in the inclusive learning team. So we obviously talk about decolonisation, diversifying the curriculum quite a bit, and it's an institutional project, if you like. But I think I sometimes come at it from a different perspective. I think content and kind of teaching and all that kind of stuff is important. But what you guys are doing now, the way we do things, the way that you relate to staff is all part of it as well. And I think that's a key thing to kind of relationships, emotions, but how we challenge those kind of power hierarchies in how we teach, how we learn, relationships we form in higher education, not just reading this, which it sometimes becomes about and conflicts with. So.
I think that's a good point, moving away from reading
I'm Kelly. I'm from the School for Business and Society, and I've been working on this project with Thomas and Natalia. It's been a pleasure. And I won't say much because I feel like I've spent quite a lot of the last few months talking to people about decolonisation. So I'll leave it up to Thomas and Natalia today, but the one thing I would say that's really difficult about a collective approach is exactly this, wanting to go from the bottom up, and that actually taking a really long time and being really complicated, versus wanting to do something and make a change. And it's very hard to know when to make your move, like when you have the answer. Yeah, maybe it's me which procrastinates, but yeah.
I'm Bridget, and
Sorry, should have been on here. I can't write like this. I'd like to say.
I'm Crompton. I'm a lecturer in environment and geography. I think with decolonisation projects, we need to be having open and uncomfortable discussions of where knowledge has come from. Even in the sciences, it can feel a little bit of a cop-out to say, facts, facts. But we don't actually think about where the knowledge has been attained from, the fact that there's disproportionate amount of research that's carried out in the north versus south. But I also think we need to be taking decolonisation into account as part of larger conversations about power structures, this idea that education is liberation almost, rather than just reinforcing hierarchies that are already there. But I think the challenge with decolonisation is it's not a comfortable conversation. Some people don't like to be uncomfortable because we're human.
Very good point. Comfortable conversation.
I'm Bridget. I'm a lecturer in playwriting in the School of Arts and Creative Technology. And I also lead the diversification and decolonisation group for theatre. And I think decolonisation, for me, I think it's about actively deconstructing and dismantling things, existing practices, approaches, content, all of that, in order to recenter where we start our thinking of practice.
I'm Amanda, or Mandy. I'm an associate lecturer in the psychology department, and I'm here for many reasons, but one of them is I'm really interested in looking at this both across our kind of psychology program, but like in particular modules I teach, like I teach intelligence, which has a very long and uncomfortable background, and I'm trying to actively kind of build this stuff in, but I know I'm not doing it perfectly, so I want to kind of learn more and improve with that kind of thing. So yeah.
Alright, what about in the back? Do you want to say? So just your name and what do you think the colonising project should be doing?
I'm Sue Westward. I'm work at York Law School. I'm Tina Swanley, and I'm also on the EDI team. So I'm very committed to the conference conclusion. And we're having conversations at the moment in the law school about decolonisation. Very basic conversations, and we know they're very basic conversations, but there are signs of obvious exclusions, even in the underrepresentation of people from Black and minority ethnic communities within the teaching team. And that's also gendered as well. That's another story. But I think we don't know what we don't know yet. And we're also looking to the fact that the university is developing its own kind of systems and strategies at the moment. And there is a sense where we risk sitting back and saying, well, wait until we hear what the university says. Not just out of a sense of passivity, but also because there's no point in developing our own stuff if the university's going to come in and override it. Yeah? But we also don't want the whole kind of thing to stall either. I guess for me, it's real basics, you know, who do we exclude, who do we not think about, what knowledge do we not include in the knowledge that we convey, what are the norms and normativities underpinning the knowledge that we do disseminate at the moment, and how then can we start overcoming those types of exclusion and associated power inequality.
That makes sense. Seems like a bit of a power imbalance between the school and the department as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was thinking symbolically, this inner circle and outer circle is really interesting, isn't it? Because you could draw parallels, couldn't you, with a colonised or decolonised curriculum. You know, and I'm not saying that this is what's happened here. It's happened inadvertently, I think, but you know, so there are privileged sites of knowledge and understanding that get perpetuated, and there are people on the margins.
Something here.
Hi there, I'm Duncan Graves, team leader and lecturer for the Masters in Cyber Security. Security and cyber security is a sensed variable associated with computers but not necessarily related to them. And I think that decolonisation projects should be there to reflect the plurality of the different viewpoints on what constitutes security and security. For instance, I can speak of my own field rather than anybody else's. So I would welcome it as a mechanism for rebalancing or making sure biases are either addressed or recognised in our curriculum. But I've no experience
It's a good start.
working on these projects, I should say.
Over here at the end.
Sorry, I've literally just came in.
Oh, no, you're okay.
I'm a first year student and I'm pretty much ready because I'm from there, I know very little about it and probably should know more. So that's pretty much how I'm excited from the students, so I don't know how many of these amazing teams of people for this, but yeah, just to learn more about it.
It's so nice that you're here.
Great.
So then, kind of having in mind all the hopes that we've talked about, and then keeping in mind what Thomas said earlier that we've talked about, and we did a little bit of research before coming in today, and we looked into different universities around the UK to see what they were doing, and we did, without calling out any specific university, we did find out that most of them, or if not all of them, have put out different statements in terms of what they were wanting to do for decolonizing their curriculum, or especially after what happened in the US with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests started coming out. A lot of people came out with diversity and inclusion statements. But what we found today is that most, if not all, are inactive or no longer funded or ran by students who have already graduated and are no longer continuing. So we want to have a little bit of wider discussion. I'm not going to pick on anyone specifically. And we can chat about our own self because, again, we're here to learn from each other, not necessarily from ourselves up here. Why do you think they fail?
Are we telling you or are we talking to
Each other, or are we telling us? I'll sit in the circle too.
One of the reasons I've seen that they fail is people are scared. They are worried that if they push too far, or if they offend too many people, or if they upset too many people, I think there's this politeness concept, especially within British academia, about like not wanting to offend someone by saying that what they're doing is racist, or something like that, that somehow is the worst thing to call somebody, that to say that what they're doing is racist, instead of being a racist being one of the worst things. So I think that people are afraid to push further because they're worried about, rightfully so, jeopardizing their career, jeopardizing their ability to mentor students through the rest of their careers, because it's like, okay, well, if I'm not here, I can't continue to help all these students I'm helping. So I think there is an element of fear to it. That's kind of why they don't go beyond the kind of superficial beginning stages.
That's a really good point. I'm going to be writing a list on the board so we can kind of see them ourselves. So the first one, fear.
That's inherently linked to power structures, right? Because often the person you're afraid of offending is someone who's much higher up the pecking order.
So you also see people who, once they achieve the power, they then just forget, or they don't really care to, they're too busy, they've got too much going on, And they're just like, well, it's a line on my CV from a couple of years ago, and looks good.
That's a good point. Do you think that a lot of these things are started by maybe keen students who want something in their CV and then it doesn't continue? Sometimes. Anyone else have any thoughts about why they fail? It could potentially be within your own department. Why do you think decolonization would not be accepted within your own department, or why would it be challenging?
I think because it doesn't have an easy success metric, right? You can't be like, right, decolonized, done. And I think in terms of certainly academia and performance reviews and the power structures we're working within and all of that, it's not, you can't just turn around and be like, right, that project's done, let's move on to the next thing. And that I think is inherently at odds with coordination success.
Just building on, I suppose, not being too political, but no, maybe we should be political. It's the right way to do that. I suppose the whole system that we're working with into the kind of higher education system that is not always, because I think we have micro moments. We're having micro moments at this conference, aren't we, of resistance and doing things differently. But on the whole, kind of needing to perform outcomes, NSS, all the rest of it isn't necessarily set up for decolonising education holistically, where we're looking at every aspect and continuing to work on it for generations, because there'll be a new thing or there'll be a new metric. So I think it has to be a transformation of the whole system, which is why it's difficult, because when's that going to happen? Who's going to lead on that? Is it going to be within this government? Is it, you know what I mean? So really difficult. And again, I don't want to kind of make it seem like we can't make change, though, because I think it's kind of working out micro changes and pace of change and how to do that as well.
No, but I think that makes perfect sense, and I think connecting kind of all the points that you're both bringing up, there's something about decolonization that people will find it scary, because they say, well, we're going to tear down the system, we're going to uproot things and change things all of a sudden, which in a way it is what it is, because it is not just a metaphor, it's something that should be constantly happening. But I can see where that fear can come in when you have staff who's been here maybe quite a long time, and then you have new people who are saying, well, we want to change everything and take down all the reading lines and take down all the PowerPoints, and we want to see and improve, and that can be a scary thought.
Also, I think lack of commitment on the part of institutions in terms of resource, because this is time-consuming, hard work, and there's no provision for that. There's no allowance for that made in terms of workload models, hard cash. The university is very good at making statements and very bad at backing that up with money and time in order to make things happen.
Yeah, that's something that came up a lot at our conference by people from different universities, that it was quite common for a university to express interest, but actually the kind of the workload, the kind of putting things into timetables were a lot harder, and it was difficult because some people were saying that they went up to their, whoever the leader was, and to say, look, I can either do this with this time, or I won't be able to do this at all. And sometimes that left people where they had to just leave the project, because unfortunately there's just a total unwillingness to cooperate.
I think sometimes I know from my experience with some stuff, not with decolonisation, but some other things, you're having to do, if you want to do it, it's kind of above what your usual job is.
Yeah.
And sometimes in your life you have more capacity for that than you do in other times of your life. And so even people who are really committed and want to, physically can't sometimes, because it is going above what their job expects them to do, as it were.
Okay, so kind of keeping in mind the time a little bit, because I know we've gone maybe a minute over time. And just to have a bit of a close-up, do we have any thoughts on how are ways that we could take initiative? We could take a bit of action within our own departments, or maybe within our own lectures, or maybe with students independently and individually, but how we can kind of implement these kinds of values. Because again, decolonization itself is a huge movement. It is starting from the root. But moving away and taking baby steps, how do you think you or your department can make an impact? And again, you can talk amongst yourself, you can let me know. I'm just kind of casually making a list so we can kind of have an idea of what we're talking about.
Well, workload is really important, isn't it? So one of the things that we've done, guys, it's persuaded our school that they should be workloading, and obviously can't workload everyone for a bunch of decolonisation stuff. So we're trying to negotiate a process whereby when people, individual staff members feel they're ready and they have a plan for how they might begin to decolonise their modules, they can essentially apply and bid for additional workload hours for that academic year to they have to be ready. It can't be just like, oh, I'm going to decolonise. It's, you know, a doable plan which involves students and collaboration, and then they will be able to put additional workload on that module for that year. Definitely cost that work. Slowly, very slowly, with hundreds of staff, with a few of them just doing it a year. Maybe in 100 years we will have decolonised.
I find community of practice really makes a difference as well, because I think one thing that I've found by working with teaching and learning group in environment and geography, we've been able to kind of say, okay, this is how we might, this is small achievable things we can give people to do who are more resistant to this idea of decolonisation. So particularly from sort of STEM subject where the facts are facts. Saying, all right, here is something that you can do based on what they're doing in chemistry, because those of us who are really into these kind of conversations are able to draw those resources in and say, here is a small achievable thing that starts. So that community of practice, I think, really makes a difference by building up that network.
Yeah, one of the things we found out from the conference as well is that they felt that applying for these small funds, like, you know, making a toolkit about just getting in some, you know, trainees to do a small project, that can be a really solid building block, because so this was at the University of Westminster we went to. They felt that without doing those kind of small level, they wouldn't have been able to move to a conference. So, you know, small kind of attainable little projects that bring in more students, that get in more engagement, can be a nice way to start and to start collaborating.
Any more thoughts?
Just lastly as well, I suppose, just affirming what you guys are doing, decolonising has to be with students, and part of the funds, the leadership fund was kind of mandatory criteria for recruiting one or more students, and we have to keep doing that. And the same recognition and rewarding of students by paying them, even what I'd like to see is kind of academic achievement, you know, acknowledgement from the extracurricular stuff as well as the payment, or you know, as well as the payment, let's go for that. Because it is a kind of burden to labour as well, isn't it? So, yeah, partnership should be part of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially because we want to be college, we do want to involve students, especially students who are of different backgrounds. It's something that often happens, that people of different backgrounds or people of color will sometimes will need to take 3 or 4 jobs in order to have the opportunities to come here. So in order to truly be able to involve students, it is good to compensate them for their work.
Great. Well, do we want to wrap things up there?
Yeah, that's really much what we had for you guys.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm doing a bit more of a traditional talk for my one. So I'm really excited today to talk about a project I've done recently where I've been considering the role of community and a sense of belonging for students with disabilities, and kind of considering that in a way for where we can move, kind of improve inclusion and accessibility for them. So, kind of to give a bit of background and lead into why I'm interested in this, HE support has traditionally focused on kind of more individual academic needs and kind of access around that. And a lot of this has been prompted by legal requirements, not just from legal requirements, but a lot of what's come in has been prompted by legal requirements. So things like, you know, Equality Act, Disability Act, that kind of thing. And this has been really good. I'm not arguing against this, it's been brilliant. I've benefited from this as a disabled student myself in the past. And it's had lots of success and really helped. And one of the things that it's potentially had really good help with is that there has been an increase in disabled students entering higher education. So while this has been really good, it's improved outcomes for disabled students, increased the number of disabled students in higher education. There are still gaps between disabled and non-disabled students. They are closing, but they're still there. So the first main gap is attrition. Disabled students are more likely than non-disabled students to withdraw from university, particularly in the first year of study on an undergraduate programme. Disabled students also tend to perform less well than disabled students at university. And also they tend to go on to less skilled careers and earn less money across their careers as well. So these have improved over the years, but there is still a gap to look at here. So like I said, kind of this approach, kind of mainly guided from legislation for kind of looking at needs and disability, it's vital. It's definitely helped me towards where I've got to in academia. I'm not arguing that we need to get rid of this or this isn't important, it definitely is. And it obviously helps to build towards inclusion, because if you make things more accessible, they can be included more. So I'm not trying to argue against that or its role in inclusion. But to start to kind of close those gaps completely and increase that inclusion for disabled students, I've really been thinking about kind of moving beyond just accessibility and thinking about it wider. So a bit like what we've been talking about with decolonisation, thinking more about those structures and systems that we're working within that can either kind of help or hinder disabled students. And so there are lots of ways this can be considered. I'm considering it from the role of community and a sense of belonging. So that's what I've looked into. And I've done this because I think we've kind of discussed this. Higher education can be a very social experience. It's full of communities all over the place, whether that's kind of societies to department communities. And also learning and teaching can be a very social process as well. And I, particularly in my kind of research as well, I've been really looking at kind of not completely kind of going away from a medical model approach, which is a bit more individual and a bit more based around accessibility, but also starting to think and bring in and maybe move a bit more towards a kind of broader, more community inclusive social model approach. So an approach where we are thinking beyond the individual and about those systems and structures. And this interest has really come from my own experience. I've had quite a lot of positive experience in academia and have definitely benefited from support from disability services in universities, but I have still found it quite a lonely experience at times. I have not sought help when it probably would have really helped me because I was afraid of how I'd be judged. So I've had positive, but I've also still had negative, which has been excluding at times. I've also started to run groups and help run groups, both kind of university-wide and in my department. So university-wide, I've been helping to run a distractables group, and in my department, I've got an undergraduate disability committee and a PhD disability network as well. And I'm hearing a lot of similar experiences from them as well. So this has kind of prompted this interest. So to kind of start this, I wanted to see what the current literature was saying about it to help inform my practice and to kind of potentially look at future research scholarship as well from this. So I ran a systematic search and review to look into this. All right, so I won't go through all of this in detail, but this I put together a kind of systematic search that I would enter into identified databases. So I put that together. I also came up with kind of inclusion and exclusion criteria. Again, I'm not going to read through all this in detail, but the main thing that I went through when I was deciding what to include and exclude was that it had to be research done within higher education. It had to be looking at the disabled community and their experiences, and kind of had to relate to community and a sense of belonging in some way. So I put my search terms in these 5 databases. Got, I don't know, it was a fun experience doing this, but I got 21,000 citations back, which after a lot of work, going through the exclusion and inclusion criteria, I kind of whittled down to 34 citations. A lot of them were looking at disabilities, but in kind of broader context or not within the kind of area of interest I was looking in. So with those, 34 citations, I went through them and kind of reviewed to see what the bigger picture things that were coming out of them. And 4 themes kind of emerged for me, or how I kind of organised it. So the first one was there being a need and a want from disabled students for community and a sense of belonging. The outcomes that can come from it when disabled students have a sense of belonging. Ways that people are trying to foster this in disabled students, and then a 4th theme of this kind of sense of empowerment and enacting positive change that can come from it as well. So the first theme, the need and want, the main take home is that disabled students need and want to belong, but they have more barriers to this.
So research is showing that they report significantly lower sense of belonging, and this can be linked to added financial, emotional and social pressures that they have. Some qualitative research had many students reporting feelings of being cut over during academic interactions, which could be really excluding sometimes. And a lot of research showed how disabled students recognised the importance of it and really wanted to build connections. It's just that they would struggle to do this sometimes. Number 2, the outcomes. So this was kind of what happened when work was done to increase a sense of belonging in disabled students. And it helps to improve outcomes. So it could increase student satisfaction. It could help support skill building. It could help disabled students feel like they could seek help more and access resources more. They felt more confident to do that. Could help with attainment and retention. And also help to improve well-being. So improve mental health outcomes, improve self-esteem, reduce anxiety. Ways that I found in the literature where people are trying to foster a sense of community and whether it works or not was that it was could be very multifaceted, but it was really what was the key thing was trying to support social engagement through key people. And these key people could be academics, mentors or peers, but I'll talk about the relative importance of those in a moment. But there were 3 key ways that people seem to be trying to foster community. One was through peer mentorship programs, another was through actively building communities, and the third was doing a bit of both. And this research found that when efforts were made to do this through these types of initiatives, it does help to increase a sense of belonging, it increases social engagement, can help improve attainment, and can help support mental health difficulties as well. A 3A is that something that came across was that it seemed to be connections with peers seems to be key, or maybe that just seems to be the current focus at the moment. So there was some highlighting that staff is still important, but given the bigger role that peers play within that university experience, it's maybe not surprising that this has been the current focus and potentially might be key in building these communities. There's also a suggestion that potentially disabled role models may have an additional benefit, but I think Hickey was very cautious about this finding. There isn't enough to really support that robustly, shall we say. And then the 4th one, this wasn't as prevalent in the literature, but I thought it was a really interesting one, and is something I'm seeing in my groups as well, is that when disabled students were part of these groups, communities, and had built that sense of belonging, it also then seemed to lead to a sense of empowerment as well, and could lead to enacting positive change and helping to increase awareness as well. So it has this also additional benefit that comes along as well as a sense of belonging. So, just as the overview, it what came out to me was there was a need and a want for it. When a sense of belonging is built up, it has positive outcomes. There are efforts to build a sense of community and sense of belonging can work, particularly with this peer mentor, building communities. And there can also be this additional benefit of a sense of empowerment and enacting change. And this really does also feed into what I'm seeing in my groups as well, who report a lot of these same things. And we're also starting to see this come out as well as we're developing these groups. So I just said that. So for me, my take forwards, you might have different take forwards from this, was that the literature is supporting this. There isn't that much literature out there, which I thought there would be more, which I thought was interesting. It seemed, and most of the literature I found was very recent, so it seems to be quite a recent thing that people are looking into. But it reinforced that efforts to do this seem to be worth it. They seem to have lots of positive outcomes. I think to really focus on being a facilitator rather than being the main person, but providing that space for students to kind of build these initiatives themselves wherever possible. And I want to start explicitly considering this empowerment and advocacy side of it as well. So that's everything. Thank you very much for listening. Happy to answer questions.
Oh, no, I thought you were going to ask.
Oh, yeah. You go first. You go.
How's it been? How's it been with kind of, you did this whole study, have you been able to implement it to what's going on within the any course specific or any action? Does that make my question make any sense? You've done a bit of research. How has it looked in implementing it into students?
Yeah, so I suppose I did this in a bit of a funny way around, in the sense of I kind of was already doing stuff, and I was just like, I think I want to do a bit more with this. Let's see what the literature says. So I did this kind of systematic review to kind of get me started, see what it's saying, see how that could impact what I'm doing, and maybe my kind of future research avenues and things like that. So kind of for me, I think it's really affirming that this is wanted, kind of help, the efforts to actually build community and a sense of belonging in disabled students is needed, and does help, and it's probably one of the good ways of kind of branching away from just individual needs to help bridge that gap even more, and kind of become more inclusive so people feel more like they kind of belong and deserve to be there. And things like, I definitely have experience not feeling like I can ask for help for various reasons, and this can kind of help that, so then people can do better because they can get help when they need it, kind of thing.
I was just wondering about, because were you specifically focusing on the experiences of disabled students, and how much engagement was there with kind of wider crip theory and stuff like that?
I don't know what you mean by
crip theory,
yeah.
Disabled theory and crip theory.
Okay.
Disability studies theory.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a wider branch of study that I think might be interesting to kind of add in as a theoretical grounding for some of it.
Sure, yeah.
There's a lot of North American researchers who are working on it.
Sure, yeah. No, I've come from psychology. I've researched into developmental disorders and things like that. So I'm very much just come at it from a very teaching kind of focused way. So, sorry, I've now forgotten the beginning of your question.
Well, the answer, I was just asking how much it was based within those wider intersections, but it is you're quite focused on teaching and pedagogy.
That's where it's stemmed from, and also a little bit. I used to be a teacher, and I was very focused on the classroom environment helping learning. And to me, this is also about building that environment within a department that's going to aid learning, because people feel like they're part of something, feel like they can connect, feel like they can ask for help, have those discussions more easily. So it's come from that. Knowing this new theory base is definitely something I can add to this, definitely. So yeah.
And kind of a follow-up slightly under the question, because a lot of the stuff I've encountered, a lot of it is much more geared towards undergraduate students. Are you seeing that as well, where kind of PGRs are feeling a bit left behind in terms of the support system? Because you talk about attrition rates, obviously people will leave, but if they do make it through that undergraduate, then they're kind of, my experience was, you make it through the undergraduate, you have lots of support, and then it's oh, well, you're a researcher now, so you don't need help.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what I've had here at York.
Yeah, and it's that's an interesting question, because I think in the literature it was either undergraduates or just a generic student kind of thing, and it's one of the things where I definitely felt that as a PhD student, and I slowly found out who the other disabled students were, but we were all a bit...
It was very community-based.
And then once you knew each other, you felt comfortable to talk. Yeah. So it's one of the reasons I started the Psychology PhD Disability Network, because it is really helpful to know you're not alone. And there are, a PhD is difficult for anybody, but then there are these extra challenges and extra, your supervisor really wants to encourage you to go to a conference, but you've got to deal with all these extra stuff of managing, traveling to the conference and dealing with navigating, when you find some people can find that more difficult for disability related reasons. So it's kind of helping each other, and so yeah, I think there is more of a focus on undergraduate, and even like the student support plans you get can be a bit difficult to work it for the PhD experience, which is definitely something that's come up in the group. I'm not saying I have the answers to that necessarily, but I think having these groups are a good place to start to talk about, again, it's that focusing on that, okay, well, can we use this to enact positive change or advocate for something? Or so I think I'm at the very beginning of it, and I'm kind of learning with the students and learning as we go to see kind of where we can take this and what we can do with it. So yeah.
I've forgotten the name of the book, which is really annoying, not very helpful for you, but I can memorise your name in email, because I recently read, I think it was from the States, a guy called Peter Felton, I don't know if you came across him in the literature, but they did a huge big study across the States, different types of universities, kind of public, colleges, and also Ivy League, and understanding what students need to feel a sense of belonging. And lots of what we talked about was this idea of kind of constellation of relationships, so having relationships with teachers, but then also different types of students and different things that different groups could provide. Anyway, I'll share that link with you.
Yeah,
it
sounds
provides
good.
really like practical examples and issues from those, and it's from the States, but I think it's definitely applicable here as well. And they talk about the impact particularly on I suppose less represented students, not specifically disabled students, but first generation students.
There's a lot of overlap. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, it sounds really helpful. Yeah. Yeah, I think the initiative, like the bit with the initiatives that have been tried, I think most of them had come from the US, so there does seem to be a bit more going on from that perspective of it. But yeah, I was quite prescriptive with my search, so it might have missed out some things, but yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say, because I'm a disabled person, and firstly, like, everything that seems really resonant, and it's really nice to, like, it's really, really new to know that this is, like, talked about and being considered. But I also just wanted to ask what the distractables group is, because that sounds like it might apply to me.
Oh, yeah, you should totally come to the distractables group. I can sell it out. So it was set up, I was a student at the time when it wasn't my initial idea, but I was part of the kind of founding group. But the idea is, as we called it, the distractables, it's kind of mainly aimed at neurodivergent staff and students, but anyone can feel distracted at times, so anyone's welcome. And it's basically, we meet once a month online, just as we have a kind of loose structure to it, but it's basically to encourage everyone to chat. And you can come and chat about challenges you've had or wins you've had. And it's also about sharing knowledge, because we find that we're all very resourceful and we've all kind of found ways ourselves to manage these challenges, and which could help each other, because it's quite hard to find resources that are, not, okay, I don't mean this in a mean way, but from well-meaning neurotypical people, which might not be as helpful. So we have like a resource bank that we keep while we're in our meetings, which we summarise onto a toolkit website. So I feel like I should have had a link to it, but I can find a link while we're kind of sitting here. I can share it with you. But if you kind of look, we've got a web page on like the library's website. It's called the Distractables. So if you kind of search it on there as well, and anyone's welcome. So yeah.
Hello. I'm going to apologise in advance because I'm pretty certain that my slides are really shonky, and you don't need to go to Specsavers. It's just I think the definition is going to be very bad on them. Anyway, yes, hello. I said earlier, yes, I'm Bridget. I'm from the School of Arts and Creative Technologies, and we are a smooshing together of the Department of Theatre, Film, Television and Interactive Media, along with the Department for Music. Which makes us sound like a kind of glorious cacophony of creativity, which, who knows, maybe that is what we'll be. We're so new, we're not quite sure yet. So in advance of this smooshing together, the theatre team had established a working group for diversification and decolonisation of the curriculum in 2021, which I lead. And that group was started in response to two things. The first, like we were hearing with our first presentation, and was that, like many of the diversification and decolonisation projects across the university, it was the Black Lives Matter movement, the sort of upsurge in that following the murder of George Floyd. And the second sort of impetus behind the forming of the group was a growing change in questions of representation within theatre and the wider entertainment industry. So in 2017, unease around the kind of lack of diversity in theatre came to a head when the Print Room in Notting Hill presented a play which was based on ancient Chinese folktale, and it featured an all-white cast and was written by a white playwright. And there were pickets and protests outside the theatre, and these spilled into a sort of long overdue, impassioned and sometimes very angry debate throughout the industry around who should play which characters and who gets to tell whose story. It was around appropriation and ownership and identity. And as a result, here we began to see nervousness and fear in students and a real reluctance to engage with some texts because the story or the culture wasn't perceived to be theirs. So we've done a lot in the last couple of years around focusing on establishing underpinning principles and approaches, auditing our teaching materials and creating tools to track the diversity of content across programmes. All of this with the aim of enabling and supporting confident student engagement. It's probably worth pointing out that in theatre we face a particular challenge when it comes to the ways in which we ask students to engage with the curriculum. In many modules, we're not simply looking at texts and engaging with them by reading them or by analysing them, but we're actually asking for them to be spoken aloud, to be enacted, to be rehearsed. Students will be asked to direct fellow students. In acting, they're learning a craft which appears to demand that they inhabit the characters that they play. So it's not difficult to see why there's considerable nervousness around the extent to which all of these are acceptable or appropriate. So we've worked hard to articulate the ways in which a learning environment differs from a professional performance environment, but we've also not shied away from the points of crossover between those two. We've run workshops and practice sharing events for students and staff, as well as bringing in theatre industry specialists to lead sessions on inclusivity and diversification. And while all of this has been immensely positive and we have seen change, it's also highlighted how much more change needs to happen. So over the last 4 months, we've been running a learning and teaching funded project called Brave Spaces. So my belly aching about the university not putting money and resources into this, obviously a glorious exception of this fund which has made all of this possible. And the project focuses on how we create physical and intellectual spaces for learning in which students and staff feel equipped to engage boldly with a diverse range of dramatic texts and approaches. And we've been hearing increasingly, I think, and today a lot, about the notion of safe spaces. But our starting point, which is reflected in the title of our project, was that safety cannot be guaranteed, and that a desire for safety is often predicated on fear of what we might experience or of what we might cause other people to experience. As Mickey Scott B. Jones says, together we will create a brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. And this is something I'm going to be returning to. So the outcome of our project will be a toolkit that can be used in the planning and delivery of modules across theatre, creating foundations for an approach to inclusivity in the form and content of student learning. In practice, the way in which we're working towards this is through co-creation of the project between 10 paid students and 4 members of staff. And our student co-creators are drawn from across all 3 years of our undergraduate programme, as well as MA students and PhD students. And they represent a diverse group in terms of their ethnicities and their identities and abilities. So we started with a period of research in which, as well as researching the landscape of our project, we also looked at other toolkits and examples of good practice. And then over the course of this term, we've held 4 major workshops which comprise the main body of the project. And we're now moving into the final phase in which we're drawing what we've learnt together in order to build our toolkit. So I thought the most interesting thing to share today would be an insight into those 4 workshops. The first and the last were run by members of staff and with students. And over 2 hours, in the first one, we established the key areas of investigation. So working through practical exercises, because we are, after all, theatre people, as well as through discussion, we thought about the nature of a learning space, about how we enter and leave it, about how we hold that space, what we bring in terms of expectations and vulnerabilities. And as we worked, we threw thoughts and questions onto post-it notes and identified from them 4 areas of interest that we discussed further in smaller groups. So those were the notion of safe spaces as opposed to brave spaces, the space of the classroom, expression of identity, and encountering other identities. And by the end of the workshop, we had laid out a sort of bedrock of questions. We didn't know the answers to them yet, but we knew what we wanted to ask. And interestingly, some key themes were already beginning to emerge, particularly around our understanding of risk. Once we engaged with the possibility of a brave space, we found ourselves discussing risk, whereas the concept of a safe space led us more directly to threat. A safe space feels like one that has to be controlled, whereas a brave space is one that challenges the transactional model of classroom management. So pedagogically, we felt that we were entering some interesting territory. Our middle 2 workshops were 4 hours long each, and each one was led by a visiting industry practitioner. And this was partly an important acknowledgement of the wider landscape of the project. Although we inhabit an educational context, we are also industry focused. I work professionally as a playwright alongside my role as a lecturer, and many of our students are looking to enter the theatre industry. So the perspective and expertise of theatre practitioners who are addressing and engaging with inclusivity and representation kept the industry in the project sights. So our 3rd workshop was led by Matt Harper Hardcastle, who is the artistic director of Next Door But One. Next Door But One is an award-winning LGBTQ+ and disability-led theatre company based in York. And the focus of Matt's workshop was considering how we might begin to make a brave space. And to start with, he gently led us through an exercise in which we built a collage of fears, using visual images that represented something that held us back from being brave. And in discussing and reflecting on this, we acknowledged fears without feeling the need to overcome them. We identified our fear of disagreement or of being judged. We began to tease apart the difference between personal and creative challenges and to interrogate our desire to feel safe. He encouraged us to embrace messiness and to be willing to accept the gaps in our skills and knowledge. And this was a powerful moment in the project in terms of building trust between staff and students and embracing the idea of a brave space rather than a safe space. And the second part of Matt's workshop led us into playback theatre exercises in which we used a number of different approaches to the telling of other people's stories. They were simple, short exercises in which we drew closer to taking on the stories of others and retelling them through the interpretive lens of performance. And as we reflected on this work, we were confronting our misgivings around appropriating the stories of others. We were addressing the desire for permission in order to do so. And we were contemplating the ethics and the responsibilities that we take on when we tell the stories of others. Critically, this workshop was immense fun. Laughter and silliness lanced the boil of fear, and the sense of everyone being in it together, a joint enterprise in which we might all fail or look foolish, but we do it together, it emerged as key to bravery. And at the end of the workshop, we fed back on post-it notes in response to a number of questions, including what helped you feel brave. And some of those responses included being silly as a group, others being brave, trying to listen to others, being open and speaking from the heart, and spontaneous sharing without judgment. Our 3rd workshop was led by Suzanne McLean, who's the artistic director of Theatre Peckham. She has almost 30 years of industry experience as an actor, a mentor and a director, and in 2022 she won the Arts and Media Black British Business Award in recognition for her work in building safe spaces where marginalised people can experience and participate in theatre. And she's also just been awarded an MBE for her services to the arts and to marginalised young people. And she had previously run a workshop for theatre staff at the invitation of the Diversification and Decolonisation Working Group, and we were delighted that she was able to return for Brave Spaces. As an aside, she is now very taken with the idea of brave spaces rather than safe ones, so I'm looking out for that wording in the next citation when she wins another award, which I'm sure we won't have to wait long for. So, whereas Matt had eased us into the creation of a brave space, Suzanne's session was much more challenging for some participants, as she used theatre exercises that asked us to confront our own preconceptions and prejudices. And the first thing she did, as we stood in a circle, was to ask us to clasp our hands together like this. In fact, have a go now. I promise I won't ask you to do anything else. Just clasp your hands together like that with one thumb over the other. And now swap your thumbs. And that's all, she said, she'd be asking of us. To do something that didn't feel entirely comfortable or intuitive, something that goes against what feels natural to us, but it's all right because we can swap back again, we can go back. And she then got stuck right into questions of white privilege, of cultural appropriation, of racist and pejorative language. It was a no-holds-barred provocation to us as lecturers and as students, a masterclass in engaging with challenging material. And she led us in exploration of passages from plays by global majority authors, exactly the kind of plays that many of our students would resist engaging with intuitively. But she gave us ways of thinking about what we do in a brave space, how we engage with challenging texts so that we can draw them into the curriculum, how we handle racist slurs when they're part of the text of a play and we're asking students to read them aloud, how we can represent characters rather than inhabiting them in order to explore scenes. And it wasn't comfortable. It did demand bravery. But these were the practical approaches that the project was seeking to explore. And again, we asked for post-it note feedback in response to questions. We asked, what helped you engage bravely with the texts? And answers included the setting of permissions and parameters, setting up a room where it was clear what and how we'd be engaging, and the comment that we work together to foster an environment where mistakes are learning opportunities. We asked, what challenged you? Answers included, I definitely felt I was critically thinking. And this was interesting, not getting immediate or correct or incorrect feedback, having to really dig in. She was very good at asking them what they thought without then telling them what she thought. And has anything shifted for you today? If so, what? Not to be afraid to approach. Dramatic literature is a great way to reach empathy. I feel like I've started to discover some ways to tackle who should play what characters, and actually seeing the hypothetical ideas in practice with texts. In our final workshop, staff and students led a session in which we reflected on the journey we'd taken through the project, and we used opinion lines and circles as a way of evaluating our shifts in thinking. One of our PhD students led an exercise that drew on playback theatre and helped us to address how we manage discomfort or fear by engaging with moments in the project when we had failed to be brave. And we returned to some of the questions that had come out of our first workshop and re-reflected on them, but this time asking how questions that forced us to think practically. How were we going to make this happen? That theme of risk re-emerged in our discussions, though interestingly we were now asking how do we equip people to take risks, and discussing the importance of understanding the consequences of risk and the recognition that some risk may be acceptable or even desirable. We finished with a focus on the toolkit that we are now building by returning again to the ever popular post-it notes. Really, all our creators loved post-it notes, it turned out, where we asked people to suggest key takeaways or ingredients for the toolkit in the areas of content and form. And once we had populated the space with ideas, every participant was given 6 sticker dots to add their vote to the suggestions of others, giving us a clear league table of the most favoured suggestions, which we're building into our toolkit. So, what is coming soon is the Brave Spaces Toolkit, which we are currently working on, which will be rolling out throughout theatre and then hopefully beyond that as well. We still have lots of challenges, so we're going to be seeking further funding to extend the project, really, partly in terms of that thing of building in workload modelling, in terms of how we take this forward practically, in terms of how we build it into module design and delivery, and really begin to impact the way in which we experience and craft the curriculum for the future. And it's a case of watch this brave space, I think. So thank you very much. If you've got any questions.